You know, that video that you gave us was amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So people, when you go to town, people are calling your name, Bello, and asking
once
you.
a while I get to see people.
Oh, it shouldn't be once a while. With 1 million views, it shouldn't be once a while.
I like to isolate myself.
Are you getting some ladies getting interested in you and your intellect and things?
I don't see them.
Oh, you don't see them? Oh, I see. So you're a Muslim, you can marry 4, so...
Of course, I myself am polygamous.
Oh, you are polygamous already? Are you married?
No.
But you are preparing to marry into a polygamous situation?
Double.
You know, so I talked about looking at the oligarchs when we had the conversation earlier. So what do you have? Tell us what you can say.
This map, I'll use it to explain why Putin is aggressive in Ukraine and not here. You know, with the
Hold on, why is aggressive in Ukraine and not in Poland?
Yeah. You know,
but Poland is far from him. He's worried about NATO getting
they were both part of the Western Bloc.
Yes.
But there's the distinction here. These ones were just part of the Eastern Bloc, but not core Soviet Union.
Okay, I get it, yeah.
But then when it comes to countries that were caught the Soviet Union, then the equation becomes two different things entirely. Okay. And then this one deals with, this is another problem Putin has.
Okay.
It has to do with the advancement of the Russian troops and then areas of support.
Yeah.
And in relation to civilian casualty.
Okay.
But then let's start with the oligarchs.
Good. I like this one.
The oligarchs, there were some inherited from his predecessor. You know,
predecessor being who?
Boris Yeltsin. You know, when Soviet Union was, when Russia gained independence after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was this transition of the economy from a state-controlled
to private.
So there was this loan for share agreement where people bought shares through acquisition of loans, and then they became very, very wealthy.
So people took loans and bought shares in government companies.
Yeah.
So if you take Ghana, you're talking about GNPC, Tema Oil Refinery, Ghana Airport Company, NCA, all of these government companies.
Yeah.
In Russia, people were allowed to take loans to buy interest in these companies. Okay, so they became the oligarchs.
Yeah.
Because these companies were big companies, wasn't it? Okay, go
But
on.
then the process wasn't as in open. It was only those who were connected that were able to acquire shares. People felt one of the reasons why Putin was brought in to succeed Boris Yeltsin was that because it was meant to shield him from prosecution, because there were multiple allegations of corruption against him.
In the process of the loan for shares.
Yeah, in the process of the privatization of the state-owned market, a lot of corruptions and allegations emerged.
Okay.
So one of the deal between Yeltsin and Putin was that whilst Putin would take over the reign of the states, he must ensure that the interests of the oligarchs and Yeltsin collectively was protected. So there were never prosecution and there were no trials in such instances.
Okay, let's talk about it. So these are all the oligarchs. How many are they? 1, 2, 3, 4?
There are lots, but these are some of the
These are the key ones. I don't see Roman Abramovich in there.
Yeah, he is not directly related to Putin because so far there have been allegations of his influence, but his level of influence with Putin is debated. But then we need to divide them into two.
Okay.
You have those who came from the security background with Putin, and you have those who are just pure businessmen inherited.
Okay.
So now this is one of the key persons who has been sanctioned so far. Ali Shah Usmanov is actually of Uzbek origin, but he was born in Soviet Uzbekistan, not the current Uzbekistan. Okay. So he's just like, and then he has a holding company, which is
USM Holdings.
Yeah, it was even on the London Stock Exchange.
Okay, he has stakes in communications, mining, and real estate, and his net worth is $17.6
billion.
$17.6 billion. Billion. The B.
Yeah.
Okay. So he's one of the oligarchs who's been targeted by Europe.
Yeah.
Where is his business interest? Which country?
Mostly in Russia. But then some of the companies are registered on London Stock Exchange. And one unique thing that cuts across all the oligarchs in Russia is that they all have assets in Britain, mostly.
Mostly in Britain?
Yeah, in the
That's a big deal. That's a big deal.
The question,
including Abramovich then?
Yeah. But the question we should ask ourselves is that if they are being sanctioned today on the premise that they are corrupt, why were the sanctions not leveled against them for being corrupt in the past?
No, you like these value statements that people, no. You just give us the facts. We'll debate that. You are too aggressive.
No, I'm not aggressive. It's even affect Africa.
No, you get aggressive.
It's affect us when it comes to...
It's a legitimate question you're asking, no doubt. But for now, let's just do the analysis. We'll come to the questions.
And then this is another guy. I think he owns EN Plus Group. He's also in the...
Green Energy and Metal Company listed on London Stock Exchange. Okay.
But I think he was forced to reduce his holding in one of this company because he was sanctioned in 2018.
By Britain?
Yeah, after the invasion, the annexation of Crimea, some of the oligarchs were sanctioned. Okay,
so these oligarchs, I don't know whether I have time to go through all of them. What do they do for Russia itself?
You see, if you look at the oligarchs and their holding, you begin to get a clearer picture of the Russian economy. It's just a dual economy. Okay. Mostly
what do you mean by dual economy?
It's just most of the revenue come from just two sources. Hydrocarbons, as in petrol, gas, and then weapon sales, arms sales.
Oh, that's interesting. But you told us about wheat the other day.
Yeah, wheat is one sector, but the key sector itself.
Okay.
But just when it comes to the wheat, then Ukraine and Russia are one of the largest. They are the largest
together.
Producers.
Yeah. So but together, Ukraine and Russia control majority of wheat production in the world and wheat export in the world. Okay.
But then when it comes to the core of Russian economy, it's just dual.
Hydrocarbons and
arms sales,
ammunition sales. Yeah. To who or whom?
I think mostly because of the legacy of Soviet Union, they retain some of the customers. And mostly it's not just sales of new weapons, but upgrade and maintenance.
Okay, of weapons that have already been sold. So for instance, if Ghana had bought armored cars from the former Soviet Union 30 years ago, we will require today's Russia to service them, replace some of them and all of that. So those contracts are ongoing. I see. And those contracts are run by oligarchs, not the states?
There's a blurred line between the state companies and the private companies.
I see.
A typical example is one of the sanctioned fellow. This guy, for example, Igor Sechin. He is seen as one of the key men.
He's a former deputy to Putin.
Yeah, when Putin was a prime minister. He was his deputy.
Yeah. He's rumored to be a former colleague of Putin at KGB. Okay. And he worked as an aide to Putin when he was the mayor of St. Petersburg, which is their big city. He now runs state oil giant Rosneft. Yeah, we know them. Yeah, they were involved in the World Cup somewhat.
But the question now is, do they run it for their individual profit or they run it for the state benefit? And it's become very difficult to distinguish.
So you would call Russia a clear case of state capture?
Probably,
would it?
If we can borrow the word from the South Africans.
Yeah, because so you have Putin in there as president, but this large business oligarch entity that is in Europe and in London, they own the money. So that if Putin has to pay soldiers, he can ask some of these people to pay them. Is that how it works?
Probably. There's a way that people believe some of them are just conduit for he himself, channeling his own money.
For Putin himself?
Yeah. But there's this attempt to make Putin look weak, as if the oligarchs are more stronger than him. But Putin has shown himself to be very powerful than the oligarchs. If you remember the case of Mikhail Khodorkovsky of Yukos Oil Company, when he crossed the line, his company was confiscated, his asset was frozen.
It was.
That shows you the...
And Alexander Litvinenko, the journalist who ran away to stay in London, was poisoned, apparently by Putin's agents.
So that should tell you that Putin is not as weak in the answer.
So Putin has a hold over these resources, if you like.
Yeah. So it's more like a king sharing the loot among the vassals.
But the Russian people, are they broke or are they okay?
Well, there is high level of poverty in
at the lower level?
At the lower level. Because
so a typical situation of a graduate from Russian university, would he find a job? Or he has to find a job among these oligarchs, the companies of the oligarchs?
Depends on if he's probably in the field of the oil and gas and the rest, he could get a job. And then probably if he has training that require him to work in the arms industry, he could easily get a job. But then
he's not getting a job with the states, he's getting a job with oligarchs.
Yeah, but the state equally has a role. Not all companies were privatized.
Okay.
Some of the companies were retained. But the issues are they really state entities or the line
is... There's a blurred line. Okay, go on, let's see what you got.
And then, so these are the oligarchs.
Yeah.
And then we need to look at, then there's another sector.
Yes.
Valery Gerasimov is actually one of the core aides of Putin. He, in conjunction with Sergei Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, are seen as the key architect of the Ukrainian invasion. And if you look at this doctrine that has been alleged to have come from him, Gerasimov doctrine, is just a refined maskirovka. Russia has this old theory of warfare that date back to 1830, called maskirovka. It has to do with use of decoy, concealment to distract your enemy. And if you look at the classical case of annexation of Crimea, that was what was used when they invaded Crimea with uniforms without insignia, and then had to confuse the world, whether it's Russian special forces or the rebels. But then now let's look at another issue, the response of NATO and the West.
Yes, I'm interested in that.
And then we look at Russia itself, its advancement or the movement of Russian troops across.
So as of now, in terms of the advancement of Russia, they are not yet in Kiev.
They are within Kiev, but not in the center of Kiev itself. They are the periphery of Kiev.
Which is where the government is. The center of Kiev is where the government is.
Yeah.
And Russia are advancing towards there.
Yeah, at a slow pace.
Have Russia experienced casualties in this war so far?
one of the key or core components of Maskirovka is that you give misinformation, and then so due to that, it's so far I think they've stated they've lost about 600 and so, but that could be very, very inadequate on attempt to conceal the figure itself. And then,
so you think if Russia have lost 5,000, they will tell us 200?
Probably.
Okay.
But then if you also go to the social media, because of the blanket ban of most Russian-affiliated media houses, you only see pro-Ukrainian propaganda.
From CNN and BBC.
But then not all are propaganda, though. Some are also genuine.
Yeah.
But then they could also be exaggerated. For example, the loss of, weapons and arms. But then let's look at the map. Then we understand why why the Russian advance is moving at a very slow pace.
Okay.
This is the entire map of Ukraine.
Including the blue and the yellow.
The blue and the yellow.
Okay.
And the light blue. But this part are ethnic Russians.
Yeah, you said that before.
This part are Russian speaking.
CNN is reporting that ethnic Russians are not in support of the war.
Well, that is an exaggeration. Because Mariupol itself, one of the cities under siege today, has strong secessionist sentiment. Prior to when the Donetsk Republic in 2014, it was later recaptured by the government. But even within that, it was known and obvious that that part was heart of secessionism within Ukraine. But the question is that does not mean, the fact that the ethnic Russian does not mean he has absolute support.
For the Russian invasion.
But then, now most of the cities under siege are equally within this domain.
Okay.
So, in order not to alienate the level of support he has within, now Putin has a problem of limiting the scale of the damage and offensive. And then, but what I fear is that with the sieges and the attempt to move or withdraw the civilians, it brings back the memory of Aleppo.
Yes.
Because we saw the attempt to evacuate civilians, and once the evacuation was carried out, it was just what we call probably a massacre. Because it was a ferocious attack without mercy.
Yeah, but the Russian invasion now is hitting civilian targets big time. At least that's what CNN is reporting. That's what Sky News is reporting. BBC is reporting that as well.
But we need to ask ourselves, how neutral are these media houses? Because I always said one thing.
But they show you videos.
But let's be very frank here. The first article of the UN Convention, the UN Charter, talks about sovereign equality. Right?
Yes.
So meaning we should hold US and the West accountable on the same standard they try to hold the world accountable.
Yes, correct.
Courtesy of CNN and BBC and the likes, we knew the reason why America went to
Iraq. It was on the allegation of weapons of mass destruction.
Did they afford us the same privilege or the same virtue to question their leaders consistently on why they couldn't produce the so-called evidence?
Well, they did produce the evidence. There was the doctor who was a scientist, you remember him, who led the team. They sent a team in. The team came back and said that indeed there is evidence that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. Upon that, President George Bush of the United States and Prime Minister Tony Blair broadcast to the world. It turned out, as they themselves have told us, that there were no weapons of mass destruction. But if you look at international relations as international law, then you will see that the American invasion of Iraq had a better legal basis than the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is just to say that Ukraine is for me. You can't do that.
No, but then let's look at, you see, in as much about international law.
America didn't say Iraq is for me. They said Iraq is doing something that poses a threat to the whole world.
Okay.
And therefore, we are going into Iraq, we'll seize Saddam Hussein, and we'll give the country back to them. And that's what they did. There was ravage. It turned out that information was not correct, all of that. But in terms of international law, the basis of the American invasion of Iraq was known, albeit it turned out to be hollow. The basis of the Ukrainian invasion is that Ukraine is for me. And that is a gross violation of territorial sovereignty and integrity of all nations under the United Nations. That's really the point.
But, okay, you know, we have, in as much as we have international law, we have conventions.
Yes.
And one of the conventions that cannot be disputed is the fact that among great powers, there's what we call sphere of influence.
That's what the Security Council represents.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, whatever happens, when you look at the Ukrainian issue from a bilateral point of view, Ukraine-Russia equation, Russia is obviously the aggressor.
Russia is the aggressor, correct.
But the reality is that it is not about Russia and Ukraine. It's about a third party.
Which is who?
Which is US. When we say NATO, okay, NATO is not anybody but America, because in the name of NATO, we have US stationing troops across Europe.
Yes.
But in the name of NATO, we don't have any single European country with troops stationed in America. So NATO is just a kind word or euphemism for America in this equation.
Well, but NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was set up after the First World War, sometime after the First World War, to protect the aggression that came from the German Führer Adolf Hitler and his people, and the potential aggression that could come from them, because they were threatening European states. These European states sought the help of the United States. And we know of how many letters that in the Second World War, Winston Churchill wrote to Roosevelt. So they asked for American help because America was geographically located far away from the war. And we all know the conversation of Pearl Harbor and the Japanese throwing the bomb on Pearl Harbor. That then brought Americans into the Second World War. So it was Europe that asked for America's support to form the NATO. So in that circumstance, America deposited its troops in countries where they suspected that wherever there's an aggression, we can catch it. The aggressors were the Eastern Bloc. So Germany, that's Adolf Hitler. So Poland, so Russia, and all of that. So that's the point about NATO. They don't have to have a place in America. They ask America to come. Is that why Putin is invading
So the question now is, at the end of the Cold War, what is the relevance of NATO? Because we've seen NATO being used to bully the world.
How has NATO bullied the world after the Cold War?
Kosovo was carved out of Serbia. And that's why Kosovo still today has a bit of issue of recognition. NATO bombings. We saw NATO violating the non-fly zone imposed on Libya. So that is NATO being used to bully the world. But that's not the fact. That also deny the fact.
All that is okay. You see, the liberation of Kosovo from Serbia is liberating one country from the other.
Kosovo was an integral part.
Yes, assuming that we go to Ghana and we start to bomb Togo, and we start to be aggressive towards Togo, like Saddam Hussein did with Kuwait in the first Iraq war. Saddam Hussein decided that Kuwait was for me and said Kuwait is another province of mine. He moved troops into Kuwait. President George Bush felt that no, you can't do that. So NATO rise up and defend the sovereignty of Kuwait. That's what happened in the first Iraq war. The second Iraq war was the threat of weapons of mass destruction. Now, in the bombing of Kosovo and all of that, in the post-Cold War, the breakup of the Soviet Union, it was to liberate countries that were beginning to be concerned about the imposition of Russia on them as part of Russia. So that's okay. This one, he is not alleging that Ukraine is a threat. He is not alleging that Ukraine is doing anything that will affect the rest of the human society, like a weapons of mass destruction. All he's saying is that Ukraine is for me. It's like Ghana says Togo is for me. Nigeria says Cameroon is for me. You remember the international law decision between Cameroon and Bakassi, Nigeria and Cameroon over Bakassi Peninsula. The people in Bakassi, where there's oil, they are native Nigerians, they are cultural Nigerians. The international court ruled that Bakassi belongs to Cameroon. So Nigeria could have said, Obasanjo was entertaining thoughts like that Bakassi is for me, let's go and get it. So this issue of something is for me, I'm going to get it, another country is for me, is the problem that the world is having with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's not the same as the invasion of Iraq. We agree that the Iraq invasion may be illegitimate, but the basis of it was set in international law. That's my question for you.
The problem is, you need to understand one thing. The law is there.
Yes.
But the conventions are more stronger than the law.
I agree.
You get the point. And it is that attempt to, what do you call it, underwrite that convention whereby you are trying to deny Russia its sphere of influence. But let's understand one thing.
How is Russia's sphere of influence to be manifested by invading another country?
You see, there's always history within every issue. Russia has been hostile to their cause. If you look at history, the West have always mostly interfered in Russian affairs, then Russia interfered in the Western affair.
That's strength of economics.
No.
If you're weaker, you get that. It's not fair, though. I agree. It's not fair.
It creates sense of what you call it, anti-foreign and Western sometimes. Because if you look at the 1812, the Napoleonic invasion, the Civil War, when the West interfered and supported Kerensky against the Soviets. And if you look at German invasion of 1941, Operation Barbarossa, it created that sense of concern and anxiety among certain quarters in Russia when the West get close, because they begin to rekindle old memories.
I agree with that.
So that is why Russia approached two theories were used. In the first instance of those pre-World War II era, they adopted defense in depth, where you withdraw, create layers of defense to slow your enemy and then win him down. But post-World War II, they developed a new strategy, which is about seeking strategic depth. So now that is what Ukraine has also converted itself to. That is why Putin is here. He knew probably if the West, NATO is here, there's going to be a clash.
Okay, so if Ukraine were to withdraw from NATO, will that solve the problem?
First of all, Putin's demand was just very simple. Ukraine should accept neutrality and not be part of NATO. But NATO insisted that they will admit Ukraine, and it is not for Putin to decide. But you see, Ukraine should have, the Ukrainian leaders should have been smart enough. Some of the countries here don't have, what do you call it?
Okay, is Romania part of NATO? Romania is here.
I should think so.
Moldova is a part of NATO.
Moldova,
Slovakia.
I know for NATO? Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, these are part of NATO.
Okay, so Estonia is here as part of NATO. That's very close to Russia. That's inside Russia. Latvia is there. Lithuania is there.
But around that time,
Belarus, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia.
You see, it goes back to the issue of the oligarchs. You see, when Yeltsin and the rest were in power,
yes,
the oligarchs, because of their business interests, in as much as they detest Western countries, NATO encroachment on their border, were more, I think, inclined towards talk than confrontation. But for Putin and his cohort, who are from the military background, now they are in charge. They believe that that tolerance of Russia towards allowing these people to go was actually a wrong decision. That could have been challenged. And we also need to look at second thing. Russia today is far economically stronger than Russia then.
Yes, I sent you an article today. Did you see? Yes, it's true. Russia is better.
So you could see that Putin is trying to redraw the map. But he himself knows he cannot recreate Soviet Union. But he's trying to reinforce certain security belts.
So what is the end game for Russia? They're going to occupy Ukraine and make it a province of Russia?
So it depends. If he's going for maximalist objective, then he will go for total annexation of Ukraine. But that obviously wouldn't be very popular, and that will cost him more because he only inherited another Iraq like US had. But if he's going for a minimalist gain, he could seek two things. Either he seek a written guarantee from the current Ukrainian government and NATO that they wouldn't admit Ukraine. That would give him a buffer. Or he could compel Ukraine to grant certain level of autonomy to these portions.
Oh, that's interesting.
So
these portions have been annexed by Ukraine. What's the story?
Donetsk and Luhansk were declared by Russia as independent countries. But even those so-called republics were only controlling the core cities around their own domain. There were other areas that were outside. So if you look at the law itself that allowed Putin to go into Ukraine, the law technically does two things. It, on one hand, violates the sovereignty of the territorial integrity of the Ukrainian state by declaring a portion of it out of Ukraine. On the other hand, it also delegitimized the entire Ukrainian government. But the question is, we have a situation very similar to what we had when Hitler emerged. You see, when you treat great powers with humiliation and scorn, you create a situation like this. In as much as...
Like they live to fight another day?
Yeah. In as much as the whole of Hitler's arguments around the Jews and the likes were his personal views. But what created a fertile ground for Hitler to manifest? The humiliation of Germany after World War I.
Yes, correct.
So the humiliation of Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union is what is causing this situation. But then let's look at the wider picture. Now, he requested for no-fly zone. US refused to grant it. NATO is not getting involved. Because they know very well that getting involved would then require that they shoot down Russian plane. And that would make the war, that would create a whole continental war. So now they are trying to manage the war within Ukraine and hoping that they could drain the energy of the Russian forces. But if you also look at the scale of the sanction, probably they're also pursuing a regime change.
In Russia?
In Russia.
That's a long way ahead.
And
that's a very tall order to remove Putin from power in Russia.
Because if you look at the way they've been able to sanction every sector of not even the economy.
But is that going to affect Russia, these sanctions on the oligarchs?
Well, history has just shown one thing. Sanction has never worked.
But are they going to lose money?
Well, prior to 2014, there was this warning that Putin gave to some of them to diversify their assets and move some of them away from the West where the hands of the people could reach it. Some heeded the advice, others did not. But if you look at one of the things they do now, they are sending lethal aid. You know, from 2014, they were sending on lethal aid. But now they are sending, what do you call it, anti-tank weapons.
To who?
To the Ukrainian army.
Yes, Britain is sending them RAF fighter jets.
But you see, that's a very tricky situation. If you look at the posture of Boris Johnson, he's been the loudest European leader on the issue.
Yes.
But yet his allies, France and Germany, are accusing him of less action.
No, but he's sending RAF jets.
No, but
fighter jets.
Prior to that, he was accused of taking less actions compared to, because the Russians have huge investment in, what do you call it?
In Britain, but he can keep it. He's the stronger because he can just take the money of the oligarchs, sack them from Britain.
But you see, if you look at the demeanor of Boris Johnson, this is another blessing for him.
Why?
He was facing a political scandal in the
House. Yes, in terms of domestic politics, yes, this is very good for Boris Johnson.
So if you look at some of his vocal rhetoric, it's just a way of deflecting
from the pressure on him to resign over COVID.
The wider geopolitical implication is that on one hand, you see Russia and China bundling together
over this matter.
They are forming stronger alliance, but the current situation makes Russia the junior partner to China, not reverse. You know, during the Cold War, before the Soviet split between China was a junior partner in the relationship until the US was able to create a world.
China has become more global than Russia.
That was the issue. Yeah. So now, when they converge on one point, they want to challenge the whole international system. But unlike Russia, which is trying to redraw maps, China is not trying to redraw any map or replace any of the global institutions. China is trying to make bigger claims and secure more influence for itself.
Well, Russia has a greater history than China in terms of geopolitics. And so they are looking to reoccupy the position that they were in before the First World War.
It depends on the century and because of the Russia being on European soil. Because China also is a very historic state. And that's why the Chinese call the 19th century a century of shame.
Because they lost it.
They lost it and they were humiliated.
Yeah.
In other words, when you humiliate great powers, you create a problem for yourself. It's the same humiliation that the West imposed.
Okay, let's get back to the war. So Britain is sending RAF tanks, RAF fighter jets to support Ukraine. Is it going to change anything? So you were saying that they want to keep the war within Ukraine. So the bombardment is going to be Ukraine. Ukraine is going to be in a lot of trouble. So the European powers are going to compete on Ukrainian territory.
And let's understand one thing also. Putin has not sent up to 20% of his entire force and arms into Ukraine. This is just like a peg.
Let me ask you one question about the Second World War, whether that could be replicated. You know that in the Second World War, the war was being fought away from Germany. Hitler was out there annexing states, and then the big story was, as soon as he took over France, everybody was afraid because France was a big power. Winston Churchill decided that let us take the war to Munich, and he started flying RAF fighter jets to bombard Munich. Do you see a possibility where this thing becomes very complicated? Missiles are going to be thrown at Moscow.
Well, even if they would throw missiles at Moscow, it would be difficult to achieve.
Because of the distance, the shared distance?
No, mind you, Russia has one of the most advanced anti-missile systems in the world, S-400.
Well, so to block the missile that is coming.
And they are the manufacturers of it. And that is one of the things creating the rift between...
But the United States has more ammunition.
But when it comes to anti-missile system, it is believed by analysts that the most advanced anti-missile system is S-400, not the American THAAD system. And that's
do you see a bombardment of Russian embassy in, say, London, in Washington, D.C., in Israel? Do you see something like that happening? As a way to get Putin to sort of sit up?
I think they underestimated the will of Putin to pursue his goal. But I don't think they want to seek a confrontation with Putin. Because in every confrontation, he who has more to lose becomes very reckless and does everything at his own pace.
Yeah. And Putin will have more to lose. And now, on the oil factor, America has now closed Russia's oil. They announced that, I think today.
It's a ban and not a sanction.
It's a ban, yes. They banned Russian oil. Europe hasn't done that yet. The speculation is that 2/3 of European countries are taking their oil and gas from Russia. It's going to be very complicated if they say that they're not going to take that anymore. Is that part of the strength of Russia that was unknown before the end of the Cold War? Is that part of the strength of the new Russia that you talk about, that the new Russia is not as weak as the old Russia?
That was known. But I think once Putin himself expected a military backlash, he didn't expect a total ostracization of Russia. I think from the sporting world to all these activities.
But the sporting world is happening. We're going to talk about that as well. Now he's threatened that if Russia doesn't play in the World Cup, there will be no World Cup. What are the ideas? He's going to bombard Qatar?
It's just one of those things to do away with the pressure. He's cooling himself.
Are you sure?
Probably.
But people are taking that very seriously. FIFA have announced today that players who play in Ukraine and Russia who want to move to Europe are allowed to do that between now and the end of April, even though the transfer window has closed in January.
The least talk about that FIFA issue, the better. Because when we were investigating Brazil, they threatened us with, what do you call it, ban and suspension. And we are mingling politics with sport.
Yes.
And we've seen a desecration of that so-called value of. So the least talk about that aspect, the better.
So you don't agree with FIFA making statements about Russia in the context of sports?
I don't believe in selective treatment. If the yardstick is straight, let it be straight on anybody. But don't tilt it and seek international, exceptionalism when it comes to certain issues. We've seen Israel bombed Palestinians, and that's why when you go to the Middle East today,
and Israel is still allowed to play in the World Cup.
Israel violated 65 UN resolutions. It's still there. But this attempt by ICC to open a war crime probe, another issue I don't want to talk about, because.
But America doesn't subscribe to that.
But
they don't do ICC.
But there's this belief that once the crime is committed, ICC has jurisdiction. But the question is, we can't deny the war crime taking place in Ukraine. And there's these people, when war comes, they talk about Geneva Convention on Prisoners and Warfare as humanitarian law. I beg to differ.
But again, the Israeli example you cite, I'm not comfortable with it. So Israel and Palestine have agreements at the United Nations in terms of territorial space. Palestine believes that Israel is violating its territorial space because they've seized Golan Heights and they've seized Hebron, Jerusalem, where America has now established its embassy under Trump. So when the Palestinian war machine, Hezbollah and Hamas, do the things they do by throwing missiles to Israeli hospitals, throwing missiles to Israeli schools, and then Israel responds by bombarding Palestine. Why are you comparing that to what's happening in Ukraine?
Gaza has been described as the world's largest open prison because it is congested and overcrowded.
Yeah.
So in such a situation, when the person fighting for his freedom has only one option, to throw anything he has at his much stronger adversary, do you blame him? The question is, who placed him in a condition where he has to fight?
What placed him in the condition is the 1969 war.
No, but let's be very frank with you. The whole Jews were brought from Europe.
Yes, correct.
Balfour Agreement.
Yes, they were brought from Europe.
On the face of it,
Europe and America.
Yeah, Balfour Agreement on the face of it looked like a humanitarian favor.
Yes.
But Balfour
to restore the Zionist state.
Zionist state.
Yes.
Which has been collapsed millions of years ago. Because Israel. Collapsed? No, the Jews today, per Israeli law, any Jew across the world has the right to return.
Yes.
Per the same Israeli law, a descendant of a Palestinian who left Palestine as a refugee out of Israeli annexation cannot return.
He can return through Israel's permission.
He can't
like
return.
Yasser Arafat could have returned, but through Israeli permission.
He can't return to claim citizenship.
Of Palestine, he can't.
Palestine. No, he can't return.
He can't.
One of the sticking points in negotiations about the right of return of the refugees. But yet, a descendant of one who cannot even pinpoint his grandfather.
Well, his grandfather is Father Abraham.
Who has link.
Yeah, to Father Abraham. You can say Father Abraham is
but
his grandfather.
The Balfour Agreement itself is a piece of xenophobic treaty.
But it was signed.
But it was a xenophobic treaty because the Jews were in Europe for thousands of years. They were never integrated fully into European culture.
Yeah, and Hitler came to try and wipe them out.
So the Balfour Agreement was a way of Europeans getting rid of a burden they didn't want. So they packed the Jews and dumped them somewhere.
No, they took them to the Promised Land.
Why?
They took the Jews because of Hitler's aggression and said, listen, you people have a land that has been promised to you by your God. Yeah. There's nobody on the land. We'll take you there. They took them back there.
So if Malema in South Africa says we should also pack the whites and dump them to Europe because they are from there, is he saying the wrong thing?
Your final word, and then we can continue on Thursday.
There's this, I don't know whether to say less sympathy for the war in Middle East or to say indifference, but there's this attempt to draw, what do you call it, justification and comparison, and then it also gives it a kind of, people play the religious wild card around it. On one hand, people are also comparing what is happening to Ukraine today to Iraq. And one of the pictures that was circulating was this one.
So what is this?
There was a picture of an alleged Ukrainian tank in Baghdad. But then it was believed that the picture was actually doctored. Fine. So this is the original picture without the...
Yeah, so the original image is a tank where?
Yeah, within Baghdad itself. But the tank was not necessarily a Ukrainian tank.
Okay, so the allegation was that Ukraine had supported the invasion of Iraq.
So in as much as this picture is inaccurate, but Ukraine itself was part of the coalition that invaded Iraq. So people are also drawing perhaps he's taking a bitter dose of his own pill.
I see.
And then there is this religious, there is a faction.
Does Ukraine have democracy?
Well, if we go by democracy per the Western standards, it will fall short. But if we go by democracy per conducting elections, it is more open than Russia itself.
It's 17 minutes past 11. Let's wrap up on this, Alassane Bello.
Lastly, let's look at, there's this attempt to bring religious issue into the context.
Yes.
When you look at reports, you hear people saying there's, what do you call it, Chechnyan fighters being sent to Ukraine. And mind the Chechnyans are Muslims.
Yeah.
Because around the Caucasus, the Caucasus region, the Dagestan, we have this huge Muslim population. But these are not fighters. That is a way of creating a distortion. So long as Chechnya is part of Russia, these are just other citizens responding to the call of the state. So an attempt to make it look like, and there's this video bundling around that way, because of the call to prayer. And one thing about Allah Akbar itself, that is the most common phrase of Muslims.
The call to prayer. Allahu Akbar.
It's not necessarily a call to prayer. It simply means Allah is the greatest.
Yes.
So whether there's a disaster, a blessing in the Muslim's life, these are one of the simplest you hear, either Allahu Akbar or Subhanallah. These are some of the key things that is attributed to Muslims. And so, because they were there was this video where they were in Ukraine praying, and there's call to prayer, and it was being bonded around like religious thing. But then let's look at, before banning the oil, the importation of the Ukrainian oil, there was this attempt to negotiate with Venezuela.
Who to negotiate with Venezuela?
US sent a delegation to Venezuela because if you are taking the Russian oil off the market, you must find a replacement. So they attempted to negotiate. There's this dispute in Venezuela where US recognized the opposition as the effective government as the government of the day, Juan Guaido. But then, in terms of effective control of the state, Maduro still has the control. But it was sanctioned as an attempt, as a way of weakening him and getting him out of power. But now that they need a replacement for Russian oil in order to ensure stability on the market, they sent a delegation to, to Venezuela to negotiate with Maduro. It's also another way of limiting Russia's potential blowback. Because if Russia is threatened, if Venezuela is an ally to Russia, it could send probably symbolic or genuine troop or formation within Venezuela, which is US backyard per Monroe Doctrine.
Okay, so final question. This is not about to end in a week.
The war itself?
The process, yes, everything happening.
Well, I think Russia is in it for a long haul. It is well prepared for as long as it takes.
So we should anticipate oil prices now at $130 a barrel, traveling towards $200 a barrel.
If the Saudis agree to pump more on the market, perhaps the excess on the market will mitigate the price increment. But the question is now that it is, causing global realignment.
Yeah.
The Chinese and the Russians are bonding together, and because of their focus is now on Ukraine, we've seen the North Korean leader escalating his missile test across the world.
Yes. Because he's also going to be encouraged to go to South Korea.
No, I think conventionally, head to head, he dare not.
Yeah, he's not strong like that.
Head to head, South Korea is more stronger.
Yeah.
But then, he has a reason why he's always bellicose in his nature. There's this mutual defense agreement between North Korea and China. So the fact that he shouts does not mean because he's strong, but because he knows he has a stronger backer.
Yeah.
Mind you, in the Vietnam War, China sent 90,000 pieces of AK-47 to Vietnam. That was when China was broke. An AK-47 could shoot 200 bullets in a minute. So the question was how many bullets was sent.
I see.
So if a poor China at then,
in 1960s,
could send 90,000 pieces of AK-47, a richer China could do more.
Okay, we'll leave it here. By the way, talk of Vietnam. We remember that Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, when he was overthrown, was on his way to negotiate, selected by the United Nations to negotiate between the United States and Vietnam in the war. That's Alassane Bello's presentation on Ukraine. We'll continue that on Thursday. Do you have text messages?